Good afternoon. Thanks for waiting for me to run up the stairs and get the microphone. It's essential to these kinds of programs. My name is Justin Veach. I'm the manager of the museum's Stewart Auditorium, and I curate public programs. I just want to thank you all for coming out this afternoon and sacrificing a bright, warm, sunshiny Sunday. It's an interesting day to be hanging out in a dark room. Yeah. Before we get going, I want to thank a few folks for making our programming possible: the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District, the Stewart Family Foundation, the Friends of the Longmont Museum, and of course our do we have any members with us? Hey members, thank you. We simply can't do all that we do without you. I should inform you all, if you don't know already, we've got a Picasso show up. Who's seen it? Great. Not only do we have a Picasso show up, but we have the guy responsible for it. Right here, ladies and gentlemen. Jared Thompson, our curator of exhibitions. Not only does he curate our galleries, but he also goes on journeys. And today we're going to be speaking of one particular journey, his trip to the Ukraine in October.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Just to be clear, I'm not an expert on Ukraine. This is kind of one person's perspective. It's going to be part talking about art, part travelogue.
If you just make sure to keep the mic right in front of your phone. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Check. All right, so how did this trip come about?
Exactly.
So it was in August. There was a group of 10 cultural workers from Ukraine on a State Department trip. So they visited 5 cities in the U.S. They visited New York, D.C., Orlando, Florida, Detroit, and Boulder County. Not even Denver, just Boulder County.
They obviously knew what was going on.
Yes. We are the cultural hub of the Western United States.
It's true.
So they came and visited the museum. It was about an hour meeting. We gave them a tour of the facility, talked with them. They had translators. They invited us to this potluck dinner the next day. I tried to get staff members to go. Unfortunately, no one could attend it.
I had dinner plans, and I skipped it. And it turns out it was a fateful potluck.
Yes, it changed the course of my life. So I made some of my mom's famous potato salad, went to the potluck, and started talking to some of the women there. The woman on the lower right, that's Olha. She actually is trying to standardize museum procedures throughout Ukraine, just kind of root out corruption. So she had contacts throughout the whole entire country, and she was my main contact. You can see the group on the left. That's them at the Junkyard Social Club in Boulder. And then here they are meeting at our museum. So I started talking to them at the potluck, saying, I really feel for what you guys are going through. Is there any way we could collaborate on an exhibition? So I happened to meet Katerina Redchenko. She's one of the top photography curators in all of Ukraine. She was on the trip, and she was like, if you really want to understand what we're going through, you should come visit. And I was like, I don't know.
She was a top what kind of curator?
Photography.
Photography,
Yep.
Okay.
So she's like, I could send you some digital files. You could print the files out here and do a show. But she's like, you really should come visit. So then I talked to Olga a little bit about that also. And she's like, yeah, if you want to come, I'll totally set you up with contacts in different cities. So I thought about it, messaged them on Facebook Messenger when they got back to Ukraine. And Olga suggested I send emails to all the women on the trip. There was 10 total. All of them responded. So I had contacts in 3 different cities. And I saw over 20 cultural institutions when I was there, so it was a really thorough cultural tour of Ukraine.
Can you talk a little bit about what you went through in deciding whether or not to go on this trip?
At first I was like, no way. But then I was like, screw it. So I bought a ticket. You cannot fly into Ukraine. You have to fly into Poland and take trains. It took me 36 hours from Denver to get to Kyiv. At first, I was like waking up in the middle of the night thinking, what have I done? But I started watching YouTube videos. There's this woman in Ukraine, and she was filming everyday life in Kyiv. And it totally calmed me because people were going about their lives. People were in the park playing chess. Restaurants were open. Stores were fully stocked. So after watching these videos, I realized, it's not like Poland during World War II. Life is going on, so it totally eased me, and that definitely helped. So these are the cities I went to, just to kind of give you a background of where the front is, the cities I visited. So I visited Kyiv first, then went to Vinnytsia and then Lviv. So the blue areas are areas that Russia invaded, then Ukraine actually drove them out. The red areas are the occupied territory, and then the front line is kind of the darker red areas. So I was quite a ways from the front, but Putin is sending missiles and drones to all areas of the country. He's trying to take out the electrical infrastructure and just make life miserable for Ukrainians. I happen to be lucky. I did not lose power the whole time I was there. I did bring power banks in case the power did go out, so I could still charge my phone. The cell networks tend to stay open when the electricity goes out, and they also use Starlink for internet. So I did have internet access the whole time I was there. I bought an international plan, so I did have phone service also, which really helped.
So air raid signals are going off regularly.
Yeah,
And
yep,
people are going down into shelters regularly.
yeah, yep.
But they're not living in like fear all the time.
No.
They're just going about their lives.
So let me pull ahead and I'll show you air raid. So there's an app you can download on your phone. It's called Air Raid Alert. You can select what area you're going to be in the country, and then when there's an alert, your phone will go off. There's also air raid sirens going off outside. It went off every night I was in Kyiv. Kyiv is relatively safe. They have really good air defense. They are sending missiles and drones into Kyiv every night, but they shoot them down. Not that many people have died in Kyiv from the war in Kyiv. I mean, maybe 2 people in the last 8 months, and it's mostly from drone parts falling on buildings and starting fires. So the first time it went off, I freaked out, hopped out of bed, ran down to the lobby, and like no one's doing anything. So I'm like, okay. So I went back upstairs, went back to bed, started talking to some Ukrainians I know, and they're just like, you cannot live your life on that high state of alert every day. They kind of described it as a lottery. If it's your time, it's your time. But this app, it would go off, and then the map will show you what areas are under alert, what the threat is. This one is showing actually a ship on the bottom. So it's usually a ship, it's a MiG that has taken off near the border, or it's missiles. Missiles or drones are in the air. So you can go on to Telegram, which is kind of a bulletin board, and see more detail. A lot of Ukrainian soldiers are actually posting to it, so it's real-time data on what the threats are. It's also Russian-owned, which is kind of weird because Russia can then read any chat room that people are in, but it just happens to work really well for the Ukrainians. So going back to getting to Ukraine, it's 36 hours. You got to take a train from Warsaw to the border. I use technology ChatGPT a lot to help translate for me, so I could take a picture of the train schedule, take a picture of the platform signage and say, is this train coming to this platform? And it would actually tell you, yes, this is the right platform you're at. It will be here at this time. So it's just incredibly helpful.
So you'd upload the photo to ChatGPT and then ask it a question about the photo?
Yeah.
I'm a novice here, so okay.
Yeah, I did some traveling in India 20 years ago, and it's so much easier now with translation apps on my phone. There's DeepL, which is a really good translator. It's free. If you ever want to translate stuff, I highly recommend it. There's also Google Translate. I use that quite a bit. So this is a typical sleeper car in Ukraine, the picture on the left. It's usually 4 bunks. They give you your own linens. You make your own bed. It was a 14-hour journey from the border town in Poland to Kyiv. And it's just a really great way to travel, incredibly soothing. You're just, rocking back and forth. It was an overnight train, so I slept most of the time. These are my compartment mates. We were fast friends towards the end of the trip. When I first met them, a lot of Ukrainians are very stoic people. They don't smile. And I have kind of a dry sense of humor, so I wasn't sure if they would get it. But, we were all best friends. I'm friends with over 40 Ukrainians now on Facebook. And this woman in the top right photo, I met her on the train. She's Ukrainian, working overseas. She found out I was American. She's like, I'm going to make it your mission to get you onto your next train. So she brought me into the station, sat with me for 2 hours, just talked with me. She went to the market with me and actually paid for my water. She refused to let me buy water. She's like, I have a discount card. It's only $1. Let me buy your water for you. And it's just this pattern of Ukrainians being just incredibly generous throughout the whole entire trip, just really kind people. And she walked me to my train, onto my car, to my berth, and like introduced me to all the people in my berth and, you know, who I was, what I was doing there. So it was just a really good introduction. Just more train travel. They still have a lot of locomotives actually in Ukraine. They don't use them regularly, but they are steam powered, so if the electrical system does go down, they can rely on steam locomotives. So I arrive in Kyiv. On the left, that's my translator, Veronica. So she's a student. I prearranged, one of my contacts there hooked me up with her. So she met me actually on the platform when my train came in. This is actually the train station in Kyiv. And she put me on the metro, rode with me, took me to my hotel and dropped me off. So it's just really, made it really easy just to have someone there that you know, helping you out, kind of showing you how to do things. So I stayed in the heart of Kyiv, right downtown. This is called Maidan Square or Independence Square. It's where a lot of protests happen in Ukraine. Right now it's being used as kind of a memorial area to fallen soldiers. That thing says, I love Ukraine. So I was in the heart of it, which was a really good place to be. You could walk everywhere. So there's not like demolished buildings everywhere in Kyiv. There's signs of the war, and it's mostly memorials to fallen soldiers or signage, not really propaganda, but just, you know, patriotic slogans, that kind of stuff. This one says, free champagne upon Putin's death. So Kyiv was founded in 482. It's an incredibly old city. It's a mixture of kind of neoclassic architecture, but also like modernist Soviet-style architecture and some brutalism mixed in. It's on a river, so it's a really old historic trade route. It's been used for thousands of years, kind of a crossroads. Just a really beautiful city, very European, just incredibly beautiful. This is some of the Russian architecture. So this is like a brutalist hotel. It's called Hotel Salute. The images on the right are a market. It's the oldest market in Ukraine. It's still being used as a market today. It's got a really interesting concave roof to it, and it's huge. Like the market inside is huge and just fully stocked. I was incredibly impressed by the produce in Ukraine. It's an incredibly fertile country.
Do they have the things that we would normally associate with a supermarket in Colorado? Kombucha?
Yeah, they
are. A lot of kale.
They were much more advanced than I was expecting. Like the food was amazing. Like the cuisine there just blew me away. And I'll get to that. You know, I'll show you guys some pictures of what that looked like. And relatively inexpensive. All right, so this is some of the first art I saw. This is actually a burned out transformer. This is a tribute to the electrical workers. And the tags are from all the different districts in Ukraine. The title is Battle for Light. The inscription reads, where does your light come from? So it's kind of a reminder of the extensive damage inflicted on Ukraine's energy infrastructure due to the war. And it's urging visitors to kind of reflect on the resilience and dedication of the electrical workers, tirelessly trying to maintain the electrical system after it gets bombed and just repairing everything, getting electricity back up. It's nonstop. And Putin is trying to take out, especially in the winter, he's just trying to make life miserable for the Ukrainians. It's just brutal. This is another contemporary art space. It's kind of a coffee house / art house. So we went there to see a performance. This woman actually, it's on Ukrainian soil. It's incredibly fertile soil, as I mentioned before. 40 to 50% of all grains in Europe are grown in Ukraine. Ukraine's about the size of Texas, so it's big. It's, you know, the biggest European country. So she's doing a commentary on the soil. So she brought a table out, a place setting, set the table, took a platter, filled it with Ukrainian dirt, mixed it with compote, which is mulled fruit. It's a mulled fruit beverage. And then served it on the dishes, and then she proceeded to eat a whole entire plate of Ukrainian dirt.
Wow.
Keeps you regular. All right, so this is the Kyiv Museum, another museum in Kyiv. It was founded by a couple in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They were big collectors of Western and Eastern art. But this is a missile that hit within 100 meters of the museum. You can actually see the museum above and to the left of the crater, you know, the little pink in the image. And it blew all their windows out. But a lot of cultural institutions actually have deinstalled all of their objects and they're hidden. And it's for A, to protect them, and B, so they're not looted. So they're nice enough to bring me into the museum, show me around. And the director actually has been to Boulder twice, so she's familiar with the area. But a theme I've seen throughout Ukraine is just trying to pivot. You know, they still want to engage with the visitors, but they can't do it with their collections anymore, so they want to find new ways to do that. So this museum, it's hard to see, but there's a piano kind of in the back. So they're doing performances in the it's an old mansion that the couple lived in that, you know, they show their art in. So they have performances in the different rooms. They actually excuse me, did a 5-hour opera where you could kind of go to each room and experience different parts of an opera. So they're just trying to think of creative ways to still engage with the audience. And it was interesting, even though these museums aren't regularly open to the public, they still retained all their staff. So it's kind of, you can see the socialism aspect, you know, still kind of coming through.
So the funding it's state funding?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yep. And I asked her, you know, all your windows were blown out. How do you pay for something like that? Because the museums don't have a lot of money, and all of a sudden you have to replace all your windows. You know, how do you do that? And she was saying there are a lot of international grants you can apply for, and they've been really supportive of Ukraine as of late. So they were able to get a grant to replace all of their windows. They're also showing contemporary art in some of the rooms. This is a Ukrainian artist who did a series on Ukrainian cities. You can see the building on the top right there has been damaged during the war. I don't know his name, unfortunately, but I really love his work. Graffiti is also really big in Ukraine, and it is definitely influenced by East and West Coast graffiti in the United States. This has just happened to be the storage area I wandered upon in Kyiv. The train tracks, all the walls are totally covered with really well-done graffiti. And it's not just tagging, it's like really well thought out. And it's often a blend of like political messages, social commentary, and artistic expression. It really runs the gamut. This is the National Museum of History of Ukraine in the Second World War. Over 5 to 7 million people from Ukraine died in the World War II. But they're also trying to document the current war. So you can see these two pictures on the right. Those are some of the missiles and drones that have been fired into Kyiv in Ukraine. And that's a turret from a Russian tank that has been blown off.
I just think it's remarkable that the Ukraine continues to fund arts organizations amidst this, attack.
Yeah.
And that they still value these arts organizations despite the fact that they've got to pour everything they have financially into fighting off this Russian aggression.
Yeah. Yeah, they are really good. Like the art scene in Ukraine is still incredibly vibrant and I was surprised at how vibrant it was. A lot of people I talk to, though, are sick of all the art being about the war. They want art to go back to just being about things not war-related. But art's a really good way to document history, too.
Can you tell us a little bit about how artists are getting by there? Is there an art market? I mean, are people selling their work? Or
I actually, in Kyiv, I was looking to buy art, so Katerina, the photography curator, gave me a walking tour of Kyiv, and I was asking her, can we go to galleries? I'd like to really look into see what I could get to bring home. And she said a lot of galleries have actually closed just because there's not any tourists coming into Kyiv anymore, so there's really nowhere to sell it. So they are struggling. Another city, which I'll show you later, they're really good about supporting the local art scene. I went to an artist collective where there was a lot of local art for sale, so I was able to pick some stuff up there. But yeah, it's a really hard time to be a working artist unless you're grant-based.
So do they have day jobs, or is there a lot of state support for individual artists?
There's some state support, but it's a really tough way to make a living in Ukraine right now. Another thing I want to talk about is the restaurants. The restaurants are so incredibly stylish in Ukraine. I was not prepared for that. The image of the staircase, and then those are actually lit hands. It was kind of like a speakeasy. So Olga brought me to this restaurant in Kyiv. There's no signage. It's hidden. She had to ask like people where it was. Anthony Blinken actually ate here. And the hands are actually a hidden door, so you have to actually go through this hidden door to get into it, and it's just this incredibly beautiful space. The purple image, that's a Georgian restaurant, Georgia, the country, which if you haven't had Georgian food, it was amazing. These are two more restaurants that I went to in Lviv. And again, just beautifully styled, relatively inexpensive. You can get a meal for like $6 to $10. I did go to one of the fanciest restaurants in Kyiv. Two of us had appetizers, main courses, like multi-course meal with drinks, and it was like $93 total. And that was like one of the best restaurants in all of Kyiv. So it is incredibly affordable. And the chef, he was taking traditional Ukrainian dishes and trying to do them in a contemporary way, which it was just amazing. I bought his cookbook, so I'm going to try some of his recipes.
And you were saying everything is incredibly fresh, and there's like a real variety of...
Yeah, yep. The food in Ukraine, so there's a lot of traditional dishes. These are vareniki, the ones on the left. They're dumplings, very similar to pierogi, filled with potato and onion. That's Kyiv cake, so it's layers of crispy, nutty meringue along with buttercream and chocolate. The bottom image on the right is kapachuri, so that's actually a Georgian dish. It's kind of almost like a bread bowl, so it's filled with cheese and an egg. Just incredibly delicious, but they also mix it with fresh fruit, a lot of fermented fruit, such as sauerkraut, pickles, fermented tomatoes. The dish on the left there, that's a charcuterie board. So it's a selection of cured meats, dried sausages, smoked pork, often served with a flatbread. The top middle image was a breakfast salad I had. It was just incredibly delicious and healthy. The bottom dish is banash. It's a traditional dish in Western Ukraine. It's cornmeal porridge served with cheese, fried pork fat, and dill. And it's traditionally served in an enamel pot, which is part of typical for Parthian cuisine, which is in the lower, kind of the southwest section of this country. It's a mountain range that has kind of separated that part of the country from the rest of Ukraine because it's hard to get to, so they kind of have their own culture. It's a bit isolated. And then the dish on the far right is a millet porridge. It's often cooked over an open fire. It's a staple of Cossack cuisine. The Cossacks were a kind of fierce fighting semi-militia people that were kind of defenders of Ukrainian heritage quite a while ago, a couple centuries ago. But they're still relevant today with the struggles. They kind of bring the Cossack power out now. So one of the women I met that came to our museum was actually a producer, an opera producer. So her opera was actually playing when I was there. It was actually at the National Philharmonic of Ukraine in Kyiv. So she comped me with, fourth row seats to her opera, and it was a fresh take on an old opera from the 17th century called King Arthur in Search of a Hero. So it blended dramatic text, singing, and music. Some of it was actually in English, so I could understand it. And it was played to a live orchestra. They actually brought in a Spanish conductor. And this opera actually was paid for by a cultural fund, the Ukrainian Cultural Fund, and it was actually only 2 nights. They did all this work for an opera that only ran 2 nights. But it was just in this beautiful old symphony hall and just really well done. Just an incredibly surreal evening. So this is another contemporary art museum in Kyiv. It's called the Pinchuk. So it's named after Viktor Pinchuk. So he's actually an industrialist. He took over the steel industry. He's a Ukrainian oligarch. And he took over the steel industry after the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, made billions of dollars. He's actually friends with the Clintons. But he's a huge supporter of contemporary art. Ukrainian art, but also a lot of emerging artists worldwide. He does the Future Generations Art Prize. So it's an international award for emerging artists worldwide, usually under 40, younger. This museum was founded in 2016. They renovated a building. It's just incredibly modern. They do a really good job of putting exhibitions on. Like, it rivals anything I've seen in the United States. And I build exhibitions for a living, and I was impressed, by what they do. So the main prize wins $60,000 cash prize along with $40,000 for an investment in their practice. So the piece on the left was actually the winner. It's a Bangladesh artist. And this is trying to just expose crimes against women and ethnic-born minorities. So this is actually floating about 2 feet off the floor, and it represents a rug. And the crimes aren't going to be swept under the rug anywhere. There's no place for them to hide. So she actually worked with communities along the river in Bangladesh, where women would embroider their stories of their struggles onto these green squares. So it was a community project, and it was just really beautifully done. It was all suspended by these gold threads that just kind of shimmered in the light. Then this piece on the right is just kind of immersive projection piece, just kind of a forest scene, just really peaceful, quiet, contemplative. That's Nika, my interpreter. This is another piece. This is an Egyptian artist. This is kind of talking about the physical breaking and rebuilding of national narratives. This is all made from porcelain ware. So it's all just broken apart. And this piece is huge. If you look on the picture on the left, those are 2 people standing down below it. So, it's over 20 feet tall. And it was just displayed in this completely black room. So it's just lit up and just kind of floated in this black space. Just really well done. Really impressed with the Pinchuk. If you're ever in Kyiv, check it out. A couple more pieces. This one was by a Norwegian artist. He kind of references ghosts a lot. These are 10 feet tall. They're hand sewn on a metal frame. This middle piece is talking about, it's a mixture of traditional medicine and modern medicine, and how a lot of rural communities still have to rely on rural, traditional medicinal remedies, and just kind of that connection between the old and the new. And again, just beautifully well done. The whole floor is just covered in golden leaf, and just, I don't know, I was super impressed. This last one is actually a South African artist. This is referencing the role of ritual and death. The artist's uncle actually died by suicide, and it was during COVID, so he couldn't attend the wedding. And then we're moving on. This is actually Ukraine House. It was actually built during the Soviet era, around late 70s, early 80s, as kind of a tribute to Lenin. Lenin actually never even went to Kyiv, so it was never really visited. It closed when the Soviet Union collapsed. It was actually influenced by the Guggenheim, which you can tell by, the multi-floor circular design. So they were actually having a retrospective of, his name's Silvashi, Tiberly Silvashi. He's the top abstract painter in all of Ukraine. He's more in the new abstract movement of the 80s, but just really influential. His works in museums all over the world. The bottom floor, the blue you see, is actually one of his works. It's just essentially a blue room, and it changes over time. So it started with a large circular reflective pool in the floor, and then they removed that and simplified it, and then they'll keep simplifying it as the exhibition goes across. These are some examples of his work. And it was called Silvashi's Circles, so it was contemporaries he worked with, people that influenced him, people he influenced. So there's 86 other artists in the show. It was over 5 different floors, just a really huge exhibition. The curator of the show actually gave me a personalized tour of the whole entire space. Just really well done. Now we move on to Vinnytsia. Vinnytsia is a smaller town, kind of central southern Ukraine. So the building, the image on the left, the brick building with an orange dot on it, is an old water tower. So supplied Vinnytsia with its water. Then they repurposed it into a gallery. So it's multi-level. You can see it's got a big spiral staircase going up it with these rooms off of it that they've actually used to show contemporary art. So again, this is a theme of, historic buildings bringing contemporary art into them and just kind of pivoting and just finding creative ways to show contemporary art. I think it would be awesome if we did more of that here.
The silos.
Yeah, exactly. Or
Yeah.
the sugar factory.
Sure.
Just get rid of the asbestos. So this is more local art in Vinnytsia. You know, Vinnytsia, there's a really vibrant art scene there during a time of war, and I was just impressed, you know, by what I saw. This is also Vinnytsia. This is a historic building. A local historian gave me a tour of this. They had started a renovation on the building, but they've kind of lost funding due to the war, so it's on hold. But it's just nice to give us a kind of behind the scenes tour. And this is kind of the crew I traveled around with Vinnytsia. So Alexandra was my main contact there. She's actually a festival organizer, so she does music festivals, really connected in the music scene. But her friends are all like artists, poets, musicians, so it's just a really interesting, creative group of people.
She was here, right? She was one of the ones who came here.
She had the picture of you in front of the museum.
There's a picture of me on a wall in an art space in Ukraine somewhere. Isn't that cool?
But it was just nice because they showed me like where artists' hangouts were in Ukraine, neighborhoods that they hung out, restaurants they go to. The whole time I was in Vinnytsia, I never paid for the meal. They refused to let me pay for anything. And just another example of how generous the Ukrainians were. Like, they wouldn't let me pay for meals at restaurants. They invited me to their house for dinner. So this is Alexandra's house. She's like, you should come over for dinner tonight. And I was like, yeah, sure. And so this is her kitchen, the image on the left, kitchen dining area. So we started drinking this vodka. You can see in the center image. And it's slightly radish flavored, which was surprisingly good. It was slightly sweet. And like in this country, when your glass is empty, we're going to fill it up. So I was like, okay. And they're like, you should spend the night. I was like, I don't know. I just had the clothes on my back. And I wasn't prepared to spend the night. But like 2 bottles of this vodka later.
You were prepared to spend the night at that point.
Maybe I should spend the night. Yeah. But they made a really good home-cooked meal. So potato pancakes, you can see salo, which is actually cured pork fat. So they use it, you spread it on bread and eat it like that. It's like a lot of fermented fruit, fresh vegetables, rye bread. Just it's kind of a traditional Ukrainian village-style meal. Just really hearty, amazing flavors. So I was supposed to give a talk the next day at the artist space. And as I said, they're festival organizers. So this is Miroslav Kavaldin. He's a very famous Ukrainian musician. He was responsible for bringing reggae into Ukraine. In the early 90s, he had a lot of really big hits, has his own TV show. He actually travels on our country entertaining troops at the USO. So him and I hit it off really well. I talked to him for hours that night. We played music together.
Who would he be comparable to in the U.S., would you say?
Snoop Dogg, maybe.
No.
He's really well known.
And
I was like,
level?
is he really that famous? So like after that, I would find random people in Ukraine and say his name and see if they recognized him. And about 75% of the people actually did recognize him. And I always had this fantasy of playing music with a famous musician. I just never thought it would be a Ukrainian musician. So it was 3:30 in the morning. I'm supposed to give this talk the next day. And it's like, guys, I have to go to bed. Only had the clothes on my back. And they're like, you can sleep on our screened-in porch. It was like 36 degrees that night. But Alexandra's husband happened to be a mountaineer. He's done over 8 peaks above 24,000 feet without oxygen. So he had all this amazing sleeping bags and gave me clothes to sleep in. So I slept great on their porch. Woke up about 5:30 in the morning, still heard music. And I was thirsty, so I went down to get water. And Miroslav is down there playing music with Alexandra's 2 kids, 11 and 13. One's playing ukulele. Miroslav's on the piano, and another son is on the drum set. And he's teaching them how to play music at 5:30 in the morning. I was like, you guys are crazy. I'm going to bed. So they're like, the next day, we got up about 9:30. They made me a nice breakfast. And they're like, we're going to go swim in the river. So it's like 39 degrees. So we hiked through this forest. It's the Bug River. So we hiked down to the river, stripped down naked. Everyone dives in. The water was probably 45
TMI.
degrees. But it was incredibly refreshing and just a great way to wake up.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So this is the art space I was talking about that they co-founded. It's called Peach. In Ukrainian, that means oven or stove. In traditional Ukrainian homes, there was kind of a hearth in the living room area that they would cook over, in kind of a communal area. And it was in this old building, and the room they converted to the art space used to be the furnace room, so that's kind of where the connection comes from. So half of it is coffee shop. The pictures on the right, you can see the coffee shop, and it's all local art hanging on the walls that's for sale, so it's really supportive of the local art scene. And just really good coffee shop. Coffee culture is really big in Ukraine, like amazing coffee, cappuccino everywhere. I mean, yeah, it puts Starbucks to shame. This is the other half. This is where I gave my talk. So it's a kind of lecture area, but also a small gallery. So I did a presentation on Longmont Museum, contemporary art in this area. That's actually me talking about Terry Maker, which is a show we did, 2020. I did have a translator sitting next to me that would translate into Ukrainian. We had about 45 people attend.
Did anyone see the Terry Maker show that we had up here right before COVID hit? Yeah, great show, great artist.
I also talked a lot about the Duality exhibition, which is contemporary Native American art. A lot of them really connected with that and the colonial aspect of it. And a lot of people think about colonialism being white on brown. Colonialism is happening in Ukraine. It's white on white. It's Russians colonizing Ukraine, and they're trying to destroy their culture, get rid of their culture. It's been happening for centuries. Putin's trying to do it now. A lot of the occupied territories, the cultural institutions are being destroyed and looted. And talking to Olga, they're trying to track where those objects are going through social media to see, what's happening, with our cultural heritage. It's tragic, really. This is also in Vinnytsia. This is the contemporary, or actually it's the Vinnytsia Museum of Art. There was a show going on of a Ukrainian artist, over 100 pieces of his work. He's a painter and sculptor. He explores themes of harmony, stylization, of philosophical reflections of life, death, and spirituality. It was an interesting show. They also have a permanent collection. This is just kind of showing stylized beauty versus debauchery. The center ones, that's a Cossack. So they're around between the 15th and 18th century. They're playing an traditional instrument called a bandura. It's a stringed instrument, and just kind of different, stylistic versions of the Cossack. They emerged from the steppe regions of Ukraine in southern Russia, as I said, 15th, 18th century. So they kind of played a major role in defending borders, resisting oppression, and just shaping Ukrainian identity. So they're really relevant with the war going on today. So you see a lot of Cossacks on t-shirts and stuff, like the stylized version. And there's kind of a Picasso-themed bandura instrument. And as Justin mentioned, we do have a Picasso exhibition happening right now, so definitely check that out. This is more of a natural history museum, a little more old school in their display methods. Mammoths, this was actually dug up near Vinnytsia, and just some archaeological specimens.
Is this an example of a typical Ukrainian non-smile, would you say?
Yes, she was very serious. She was my translator, gave me a tour in English. I did have several translators. Mostly they were students in university, and they refused to take payment. I tried to pay them, and they refused. They just wanted the practice of, speaking English. I did buy one of them a piece of art because she refused to take any payment, and I bought her dinner, but no, there's very humble people. I was just incredibly impressed by the Ukrainians. I would try to give taxi drivers tips, and they would refuse tips. I'm like, no, it's too much. I was just like, please. So this is the Natural History Museum also. They also had an exhibition on the war. So this is showing a typical Ukrainian bunker. Essentially, it's trench warfare that's happening in Ukraine now with drones. So it's trench warfare with this weird high-tech angle to it. This is a headline from a Russian newspaper. There's another theme I learned besides the colonialism. Russia tries to portray Ukrainians as simple peasants and farmers. So this headline says, "Attention in Ukraine, African swine fever. Measures are being taken to strengthen precautions against the introduction of ASF, African swine fever, pathogens. We apologize for the temporary inconvenience. So they're portraying part of this occupation of Ukraine as protecting Russians from African swine fever. And again, just trying to paint them as simple farmers that are unclean. It's just disgusting. So the giant on the left is Bodan. He actually lived in the United States in Baltimore for 3 years. He picked me up at the train station in Vinnytsia. He's friends with Alexandra, super nice guy. So he spoke English really well, so I could ask him a lot of questions. So he was kind of a fixer. So media would come into Ukraine and say, I want to do a story on drones. So he would find contacts with media to talk to. Then he would organize an excursion to the front line, and take them there. So he's been at the front line several times. And he was saying at first you could cross the border, into the occupied territories very easily. But he said lately there's drones everywhere. And they're using jamming technology, so you cannot do radio-controlled drones. They have to be autonomous. So they'll actually take a drone and load 10,000 images of potential targets, and a drone will scan for those targets, and if it sees it, it'll lock in, become a suicide drone, and ram into it. So he says you get within 6 miles of the border, and there's just drones everywhere, so it's just super sketchy. There's essentially killer robots roaming the skies there.
Did you see any drones?
I did not. I saw remnants of drones, but yeah. And drones were attacking Kyiv when I was there, but they were shot down. They're using these drones from Iranian. They're Shahed drones is what they're called. They're pretty big. I mean, their wingspan is probably 12 feet across, and they carry a pretty decent warhead, and they can stay aloft for, several hours. They're actually gas-powered, and just have, you can hear them. And there's also missiles. Russians have developed a hypersonic missile, so it flies so fast, you only have, 3 to 4 minutes to get into a shelter. It can, cover the territory that fast. And the adults don't use shelters. The children are required. So, in schools, if the air raid siren goes off, the students have to go into the shelter, and they cannot leave the shelter until the air raid is done. So, it could be hours. So if school ends, they are still going to stay in the shelter, and not come home until after the alert has been cleared. And it's funny, when the alerts were cleared, they actually referenced Star Wars and just said, "May the Force be with you." So this is a typical hotel room that I rented in Lviv. It's incredibly modern. It had a kitchenette in it, actually a washing machine, a really stylistic bathroom. And I was paying about $49 a night for hotel rooms in Ukraine. It's cheaper than they normally are because they don't have a whole lot of tourists. But incredibly affordable. Normally, it'd probably be $70 a night. But just...
So now is the time to go. Is this?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is another open-air museum that I visited in Lviv. So we're in Lviv now. It's about 40 miles from from the Polish border. So the farther west I got, the safer it seemed. And I only heard the air raid siren once in Lviv. I think I heard it twice in Vinnytsia, and I heard it every night in Kyiv. So they're definitely targeting Kyiv. They are targeting the electrical infrastructure over the whole entire country. So, Lviv does get hit. So this is an open-air museum. It's the Museum of Folk Architecture and Rural Life. It's got over 100 traditional wooden buildings from different regions of Ukraine, a lot of thatched roofed houses. It was done during Soviet times. So again, it's the Soviets trying to portray Ukrainians as simple peasants and just focusing on that aspect of their culture. But it was a really nice museum. It was, over, probably 100 acres. So you could just wander, through forests and stuff. One of my contacts in Lviv took me on a tour of that. So I had, the inside scoop. And again, they are trying to pivot. They're showing contemporary art in these spaces. This is a Ukrainian visual artist. So the theme of this work is collective trauma, loss, and memory in the aftermath of war. So she's using embossing to imprint textures of destroyed buildings on those white objects. And it's kind of just highlights the physical and emotional scars of the war. And it's in an old church, so it's kind of a temple of losses. So it's, telling stories of destruction and resilience. And it was just really beautifully done and just a really nice, elegant piece. This is also in Lviv. This is the jam factory. So my train got into Lviv on the same night as an exhibition opening. So Bojana, who's their director, agreed to meet me the night of their opening. And openings here is crazy.
So the Jam Factory is a gallery
Yep.
or a museum?
It's an actually old jam factory that was redone by he's actually a Austrian Ukrainian philanthropist. So he paid for it to be renovated and actually opened in 2023, so it's relatively new. But super high-end, modern spaces. And I met with the director, and she actually lived in Denver for a while, so she was familiar with this area, spoke impeccable English, and she took time out of her night. Openings here are crazy, and she took time to sit with me and talk with me and just really meant a lot to me. So they had this contemporary art exhibition from artists from all over the world, really highly attended, just really well done. The spaces are beautiful. This piece on the right is by an African artist, and it's kind of highlights the symbolism of hair in African cultures. Those are actually hair extensions that are weaved in that pattern. You can see all the people at the opening. It was really well attended, and they actually did have earpieces that you could take where the tour was actually translated into English, so they actually had a translator, so I could actually understand everything they were saying about the art. Yeah, just a really beautiful space. This piece on the left, it's kind of talking about the surveillance, artificial intelligence, the dehumanization of modern technology. The piece on the right was by a Ukrainian artist. They are working with a group called Left Bank. Part of their mission is to restore roofs that have been damaged in the war. And it's kind of morphed into more collecting cultural artifacts from these houses, that are being destroyed. So those are some cultural artifacts, on the front there. And the triangular piece actually is a symbol of the sun, and you'll see these on, traditional Ukrainian homes. This is another organization in Lviv. It's called Urban Camp Lviv, and it's for displaced Ukrainians from the conflict in the east. So either they lost their home or they don't want to live in the occupied territories. So it used to be a Soviet-era Palace of Culture building, and it was abandoned, so they gave it to this organization. So they've been in the process of renovating it and creating shelters. I'll show you a picture. So they're actually just taking some of the floors, putting in new windows, bringing in utilities. It's a working process. Some of the upper floors aren't renovated yet, so they are working on it. You can see the image on the right is a sample room. It just gives them some private space with a bed, a place to put their clothes as they kind of try to re-assimilate into a new society. They're also morphing it's kind of evolving into a more comprehensive youth ecosystem for street culture, street sports, and creative industries as a whole. So you can see they have a basketball court, again, graffiti art, so they have graffiti art classes that students can take. Skateboarding, they have a skateboarding decorating workshop you can take. This is a dance studio on the right, so they teach kids how to do break dancing. So they're just trying to, keep the kids busy, give them creative outlets. Just a really, great organization. This is another museum in Lviv. This is the City Museum. So I, did some research on them before I went over. And they're doing a really good job. They're following AAM, which is the American Associations of Museums. They're following a lot of their procedures and protocols, and they just do everything to a really highly professional level. Unfortunately, it's closed right now because it's in the basement of a municipal building that happens to be incredibly secure and sturdy, so they've converted it into a bomb shelter. So they've installed stools in the exhibit halls. They did not deinstall the exhibitions yet, and it was still in the process of being renovated, so it's just a really beautiful space. So the exhibitry is still in there, and this is an exhibition they're working on showing about the migration of children in Lviv. Essentially, where did kids go when they were young? You know, how did they travel around the city? And they actually, even to this day, because I asked them, you know, are you okay with your kids wandering around the city? And they're like, oh yeah. And like, I found Ukrainian cities to be incredibly safe. So again, they're pivoting. They still want to serve, engage with the public. So they are doing more outreach. So these are backpacks that they actually developed. And it's kind of like a scavenger hunt. So this particular one is finding wildlife throughout the city, you know, animal tracking, that kind of stuff. And I also asked them about in the kids exhibit, you know, do you have things for kids? She's like, oh, no, it's just adults. You know, we're just trying to get data, you know, from adults. And like, are children's museums even a thing in Ukraine? She's like, no, not really. So that hasn't really happened yet in Ukraine. This is another space in Lviv. It's called America House. And it's actually paid for by the U.S. Embassy, and they're just trying to share American values and cultures with the Ukrainian people. In particular, they're trying to target 18 to 34-year-olds. So it's a co-working space. They had meeting rooms. They have classes where you can learn English, you know, different kind of workshops in that. It's all decked out in red, white, and blue. They even have like a little mini oval office in there. That's Vladimir on the lower right. He's the director of it. So he gave me a tour. I'm working with him right now to try to he wants to do a Pride Fest event in June. So he's looking for an LGBTQ plus photographer. So I have put him in touch with several from Colorado, so maybe, you know, Colorado art will be shown there. This is a cemetery in Lviv. It's the oldest cemetery, kind of the main one there. Originally started in 1787. And again, the image on the right is actually contemporary, so it's, you know, dedicated to soldiers that have died in this conflict, but there's just memorials to, you know, soldiers that have died in the various wars in Ukraine, and actually a lot of Polish people too. Ukraine was actually part of Poland at one time, and we're only about 40 miles from the Polish border. And so this is kind of the end of the slideshow. So this is a photographer that focused on cranes, or actually storks. Not cranes. In Ukrainian folklore, storks, you know, symbolize fertility, new beginnings, the cycle of life. They're often connected with springtime and renewal, you know, and as they migrate each year back from Africa. So they spend the winters in Africa, come back to Ukraine in summer. So this picture on the right is a stork that had been nesting on this roof for 8 years. And the building was destroyed, but the stork came back and rebuilt his nest. So it's, you know, it's really symbolic on, you know, life goes on. Like, you know, your house is destroyed, you come back, you rebuild, and, you know, you wait for your loved ones to come back.
Beautiful. So what's come of all these relationships you've established with Ukrainians? Do you think you'll be working on projects here at the museum or perhaps in Colorado with some of these artists and arts organizations?
Yeah. Katerina Radchenko, the photographer curator, has actually sent me probably 6 or 7 different photography exhibitions that we can choose from. There's an organization called Ukrainians, or Colorado Ukrainians, actually. So it's a group of Ukrainians living in Colorado that support efforts. So I've been in touch with their director, and they do a lot of film festivals, but she wants to get into museum shows also. So I'm working with her on developing a photography exhibition that we can travel. So I'll probably work with her and Katerina on doing a show for that. I've also befriended a Ukrainian family here in Longmont and just have done fundraisers for them, clothing drives, that kind of stuff. And I'm working with Vladimir on the show for the America House.
Have a lot of Ukrainians left Ukraine for?
Yes, over 8 million Ukrainians. Ukraine is a country of about 40 million people, so 8 million of the 40 million have actually left. It's really hard for males to leave the country. So you have to register for the draft in Ukraine up until 60 years old. So like, yeah, it's crazy. So 8 million have left. some have come back, but there's still a mass exodus out of the country right now. And a lot of females have kind of taken over roles that were traditionally used by men. And I met a lot of really strong-willed, motivated women in Ukraine. Just incredibly impressive, intelligent, hardworking.
Is there kind of a lack of, is it noticeably, are these cities kind of noticeably absent of men? No.
Everyone I met with in Ukraine actually were women, because it was all women on this trip. I met a few men in cultural institutions, but the majority was women. And I'm not sure if it's, I actually asked Katerina that when she was here. It's like, it's all women on the trip. Is that common in Ukraine? She was like, no, it's just because men can't leave. So yes,
Right.
a lot of men actually are conscripted and involved with the war effort.
And there's constant reminders everywhere of the war, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere you go.
Yeah, there's memorials everywhere, dedicated to fallen soldiers. When I was there, I saw just several Ukrainian, funerals, military funerals go by, and, everyone on the street kneels when the vehicles go by. It was, incredibly moving and just real.
How would you describe the overall spirit in general of the people that you...
They're tired of the war for sure, and just they're not ready to give up any territory. It's theirs. Crimea, I think they'd be okay with Crimea somewhat, but they don't want any of the occupied territories. I talked to them a bit about Trump and what they thought about, the administration. At first, he's a good negotiator. Maybe he'll negotiate us a good deal. But what's happened over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, is not really great for Ukraine, and they're not really happy with the direction it's taken. They do not want to give territory up. So the U.S., supplied the majority of weapons to Ukraine. They really cannot stay in this fight without us, so I hope we continue to support them. I really worry about what's going to happen with them.
Are there are there a lot of displaced Ukrainians here in Colorado that you're aware of?
I asked Christina, the woman that I became friends with, about that, and there's some in Longmont. She did meet a few. There's a lot more in Chicago and bigger cities than there are here. She did just get a job at the Longmont Library, so she was super excited about that. And she's incredibly smart and motivated. She's trying to learn English, and she's just a really hard worker, and I'm just really glad for her to actually get a job in a position. She wants to work. She wants to give back to the community.
Maybe is there anything that we can do to support, if someone wanted to support Ukraine or displaced Ukrainians, or what can people do? Do you have a sense of that?
Look up Ukrainians of Colorado, and they do fundraisers. They have all sorts of events every few months that you could go visit. They have sales where they're selling Ukrainian art or crafts. They have fundraisers. You can go eat Ukrainian food, that kind of stuff. So yeah, there is stuff out there that you can support, or you can just find organizations that donate directly to them.
Sure. Well, I want to make sure that you all can ask some questions if you have them. If you do, I'm going to run out here Phil Donahue style and collect your question, because we are live streaming. Any questions? Oh.
How long were you in Ukraine, and what process did you have to go through to get the visas or travel authorization to go there?
I was there. The trip was 17 days total. It took me a day and a half to travel there. I did spend a day in Warsaw, so I was in the country about 2 weeks. You don't really need too many authorizations. The State Department suggests you do not travel there. I did get a couple hepatitis shots, a measles shot. In the border, so you cross the border by train. So once you cross from Poland into Ukraine, they stop the train, and then they gather everyone's passports, and you sit there for about 2 hours, and then they just stamp your passport and give it back to you. Coming back into the country, or coming back into Poland, again, you stop at the border. And I had bought some artwork, and there were prints. well, they were print, like print making prints, not like digital prints. So, and I told them stupidly that I was there visiting cultural institutions, so I think they thought I was smuggling artwork out of Ukraine. So they went and like ripped all my frames apart and like took all my artwork out of the frames and just left it in a pile on my bunk. But, I don't blame them. They're trying to protect their cultural heritage. And it was just kind of a low-level soldier was doing this. And then a supervisor came in and like talked to me and apologized. He's like, everything's fine. So, but yeah, it was really easy to get into the country. I actually did get a letter of reference from Olga saying that I am here visiting cultural institutions, but they never asked for it. Because like they don't want tourists really coming to Ukraine right now. It's kind of a burden on them. They do want the tourist dollars though, so it is kind of a mixed message. And I only met 2 other Americans there, and they were both in Lviv, which is the city 40 miles from Poland. I did not meet anyone in Kyiv or Vinnytsia from the U.S.
I just have a comment. One of my brothers is an agronomist, and he had gone to Ukraine probably in 2018 or 2019, working with some Illinois farmers that had purchased land in Ukraine, and they were farmers, and he was asked to come over there to evaluate their soil, which he did, but he said since then, some of his other colleagues have gone over there and are repairing the land after the bombs have, or the, whatever you want to call them, have been removed.
Mm-hmm.
So there are Americans over there helping their agricultural industry.
Yeah, that's great. Like landmines are going to be an issue for years to come in Ukraine. In the group I met from Vinnytsia, they're all like artists, poets, musicians, and they always want to live on the same street, so they're all buying houses in this small village outside of Vinnytsia. It's about 40 miles away, and the village is kind of dying because a lot of people are moving into the cities. So you can get a house in a village in Ukraine for like $3,000 to $5,000. It's incredibly affordable.
Are you familiar with the film Porcelain War? And did you meet any of the people involved in that?
I have heard of it. I have not seen it yet, but yeah, it was recommended to me. Have you seen it? Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out.
Any other questions?
Hello, I have friends in the Republic of Georgia, and are their dinners go on for like 4-5 hours, and do they have a Toastmaster in Ukraine called a tamada at the head of the table?
Not that I saw, no. I did go to a couple of Georgian restaurants, and the Georgian food was amazing. Longmont needs a Georgian restaurant.
Yes, they do. And the tamadas make sure that everyone keeps drinking at the table.
Yes.
So once the
I did
glasses are
experience
empty-
that.
Yes.
Yeah, and the food, it's like family style where everything's just put in the center and, you take what you want. And it's in America, you get like a big plate of one thing. There, it's just lots of different variety of things. Yeah, I was not expecting the food to be as amazing as it was.
I'm sorry, I just didn't catch your name. Thank you.
Yeah, Jared Thompson. So I'm the curator of exhibitions here at the museum. My role is, I'm in charge of the exhibition program, essentially. So I curate, design, develop, along with a team. Brack is here that works with me, helping out. And I've been here 21 years now, almost.
Yeah, I'm wondering, was there any other like cultural stuff going on, like concerts or like comedy shows or movie theaters?
Yeah, the
showing?
music scene is still happening. Movie theaters, I didn't experience much. There was actually a marathon in Kyiv when I was there. So life still is happening. I think people are still out in the parks. Sporting goods, I'm not sure really if that's kind of been put on hold, like national sports or not. But life was it was more normal than I was expecting. I was expecting more like shortages of everything, but like all the store shelves were fully stocked. Like to cross the streets in Kyiv, you actually have to go under the street. So it's almost like a New York subway. And there's like all sorts of stores down there and just like vendors selling fresh cut flowers and everything. Like, it was just incredibly, I was, surprised just by the produce, how fresh it was, how beautiful the flowers were. But they do have supply lines coming in, from the western part of the country. So they are pretty well stocked.
You mentioned just the fear that you experienced when you first got to Ukraine and the advice to not always be in a heightened state of fear. Do you have any advice for people who are trying not to be in a heightened state of fear? Asking for a friend.
Don't try to control something you can't, and you got to let it go. And like in Ukraine, the odds are really against you. It's like I actually did the math on how many people died in Ukraine and the population of Ukraine, and it was like you had a 0.0007% chance of dying. So yeah, it was just trying to let it go and just don't get stuck in your head. But yeah, I would lay in bed at night after I bought my ticket thinking I'm going to be in a foreign country that's, being bombed and hearing air raid sirens going off but I actually did get Ambien from my doctor, which helped.
I have a question about exports of artistic goods. I bought actually one here at the museum that was a wooden toy that was made by people in Ukraine, and I bought some cards that were made by Ukrainians also some time ago. And I was wondering about the complexities of exporting goods to Western European countries or United States. Do you have any feeling about that?
I don't know much about that. Katerina, the photography curator, did say that the postal service in Ukraine is very efficient and very cheap. She actually suggested I mail some of my baggage through the postal service to my next destination. I didn't quite trust it. You can get stuff out of Ukraine. Christina, the family I met here in Longmont, her mother actually could mail her packages. I've been helping her with her English. She's been helping me with my Ukrainian. So her mom's a school teacher. So she actually sent me some children's books to help me read some really simple Ukrainian language. So she was able to get things out. And I actually had her over for dinner one night and made green borscht, which is a borscht using sorrel instead of beets. I substituted it with some other greens, and she actually came over for dinner and tried it. And then her mom actually sent me sorrel seeds so I can actually do it properly.
I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Thank you. Hi, Jared.
Hey,
So glad you're home safe.
thank you.
I just want to also say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for bringing this cultural experience to us and being brave enough to do that. Knowing how important culture is to the communities, and knowing what after World War II and how many pieces, if you want to take over a culture, you start taking over their art. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if they contemplate that kind of possibility about having to protect in case of the worst scenario kind of thing, a World War II kind of event. Was there any discussion like that?
Yeah, like a lot of the museums with antiquities and stuff with strong cultural heritage definitely was deinstalled and hidden away. The Kinhenko Museum, the one that was almost hit by the missile that had the windows blown out, I actually asked the director, where do you guys stash everything? She's like, I cannot tell you that. So it's guarded, it's hidden away. The farther west I got, not so much as far as deinstalling the artifacts. It wasn't as common, but Kyiv. I mean, there was tanks rolling through Kyiv at the beginning of this, so it was, you know, a really crazy situation at the beginning of this war. And just talking to the people that were there and just those first few days and like what that was like, and just, you know, fleeing your town. It's kind of like a wildfire here, you know. You have mere minutes, you know, to an hour to gather all your stuff and get out of the country. Or not the country, but, you know, get out of the city.
So as a Ukrainian and a Ukrainian speaking, I would really like to ask that when you mention Ukraine, that you do not put the word "the" in front of Ukraine. It diminishes the country. You know, I have family there.
Yeah,
and
that's a good reminder.
there is also a festival in August that, if anybody's interested, there's food, there's art. Vyshavanka, which is Ukrainian embroidered shirts, are available. I have a Ukrainian friend here in Longmont who lives in the Vinnytsia area, which is closer to Romania. She's able to get lots of things from her sister who's there. So we have a lot of... I'm so grateful to you for bringing the culture of Ukraine, which is so dear to my heart. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a wonderful country.
Okay, one more.
Hello, I'd like to echo that I'm also Ukrainian, speak Ukrainian, and I partake in a lot of these activities. I'm part of the Longmont Artists Guild, so I am an artist myself. I'd like to talk to you guys later if possible. And yes, thank you so much for bringing this to us. And Longmont's very supportive, and that makes my heart feel good.
Yeah.
When I drive through the streets and I'll see the Ukrainian flags, big flags flying, and that's a wonderful feeling. Go ahead. I just wanted to ask real quick, are you thinking of going back?
I am thinking of going back.
Do you kind of know when you're thinking of going back?
I have to talk to my wife.
Oh, okay.
Good job, Jared.
Who's sitting right there?
Oh, someone wanted to know the name of the movie that you mentioned, Porcelain War. Maybe we'll figure out how to show that here. Would that be a good idea? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank our Curator of Exhibitions, Jared Thompson, for sharing with us his time in Ukraine.
Thank you for coming.
Enjoy the sunshine, everyone.